There we go.
Oh,
Now we're
good job.
Usually they make it start.
Well, there's a record button.
Hopefully I didn't screw something up.
I was going to say the same thing,
The
but
last time I did this, I was on YouTube.
yeah, it's out there. It still is out there.
Actually, it says my name, but it was the session Mike did.
Oh,
Because Mike and I have been doing the show for 6-7 years now.
Take them down.
They did.
okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the BSW licensure overview. Today we have two speakers. We have Michelle Kramer-Prevost from the Board of Social Work, and she's going to be giving you an overview of the licensure process and also the role of the Board of Social Work. And then we also have George Babola, who is a professor and also runs the IPC Center. And he's been doing a lot related to the exams. So he'll give you some information related to taking the exam, and then I think even some sample questions to get you kind of thinking that way as you prepare for the exam. So the presentation is scheduled today from 1 to 3:30, and then there'll be sort of a natural break when Michelle and George switch. So go ahead and take a break then. Obviously, if you need a break before that, do that as well. And then there are refreshments over here if you didn't get a chance. So we're going to start with Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me over your early afternoon on a Friday. The board loves to come and talk to students. We do this at invitation for all the schools. Today I'm going to talk about professional licensure responsibilities as you move from being students to professionals. As you've been trained over these 4 years, all of a sudden you're going to be out in the world amongst all the other professionals. So I think you've got copies of the PowerPoint, but here's the basic agenda for today. We'll start out with board. What is the board? I'm going to give you just kind of a brief overview. Do realize that we are a regulatory agency. We're here by statutory authority. So we are different from an association. So we have great relationships with NASW, school social worker associations, those types of groups, but we have a mission of public protection that's by law. So we are regulators. We do this public protection, which is our main mission, through things like enforcing ethical practice standards, and we do licensure to ensure competent practitioners in the field. We do resolve complaints as they come to the board, and we do informational educational sessions like this for groups, student groups, conferences you may go to. You might see us on an MSSA or NASW conference if you go to any of those. Sometimes we do presentations there. We are a 15-member board. Of the 15 members, 5 of them are at BSW level social workers. 5 are graduate level social workers, all the different types of licensure. And 5 are public members, so they are people who don't have any background or education in social work. If you're ever interested in macro practice in the future, this would be a great way for you to see the other side of social work practice from a regulatory or kind of a policy and law perspective. They're on like 3 to 4 year rotations, and you do apply through the governor's office. So if you're interested, you can look at that. Every January we have turnover on those as terms come to an end. And then there's board staff, of which I'm a member. There's 10.6 of us for 12 to 14,000 licensees in Minnesota. So we are very busy, but spread very thin at points in the year. So please feel free to call the board, look at the board's website. It's full of tons of information. We will try and get back to you as quickly as possible, but at times you might need extra patience with response, since we're very, very busy all the time. Again, like I said, I'm the staff social worker at the board. Most of my job consists of doing presentations and education, doing practice determinations for people as they call and say, is this social work practice? Can I use it for supervision? I look at a lot of supervision plans and things for particularly graduate level. We have other staff that do the bachelor's level, but I'm the resource for that. And I've been with the board about 5 years. Prior to that, I did public sector social work. I was a case manager in Brown County, Minnesota, which is rural southern Minnesota. Did elderly waiver case management, so I've had some that was my more direct experience in the field. I think there's spots still open. There's some here. So licensure, really the benefits of licensing really for the public are that we really are here for public protection. We'll field calls, we will field complaints. Someone that goes to a social worker that has a license can be assured that you have met minimum standards of education, being able to pass an licensure exam, the licensure exam, and you've done supervision, you've done continuing education, so they have a assurance of some competency in your practice. You as a professional then will also gain kind of credibility and recognition within the professional field. Doctors have licenses, nurses have licenses, social workers who are trained as professionals and practitioners have licenses also, so you have an identity in the field. And also things like reimbursement, inclusion into other types of laws that are a benefit to you as an individual as well. Any questions so far on what the board is, how that works? Okay, that's just kind of a brief, there's a lot of history we used to put into these. We've kind of run out of room, so we've pulled a lot of that out. But there's, again, I encourage you to look at our website because it really is full of a lot of information. Just click around. You could click in there for hours, find more stuff. But so as a regulated profession, each state, again, has their own law. We have our own state statute. So you may go to another state and they may certify you or register you or license you. They might not license you unless you're doing clinical social work. So it's very different based on each individual state law. So if you again may have to have more than one license, especially if you work on a border city. I talk about this a lot more in Fargo-Moorhead, and I talk about it in Duluth for Superior and Duluth. So there may be a reason for you to have more than one license if you practice in different states. There is no national license then, per se. So if I encourage you to talk to each individual state, some of the requirements may be the same, some might be a little different, or they could be greatly different. So it really depends on where you're going to be practicing. I do know all the states except California accept ASWB's exam. So we take the exam once, and that score is normally what you can use for every other licensure except California at this point in time. So, and you can carry as many licenses as needed for each state you're going to be practicing in. This kind of becomes it's more in the forefront again because of things like telemental health. If you're doing telemedicine, internet kind of therapies, your clients could be sitting in many different states, and then each state has to decide how they're going to handle that regulation of that type of practice. So, any questions so far on the basics, the overviews? Yes.
So you said that each state has their licensing. So if you're practicing in another state, you should take the test in another state?
Nope, you can. The test is good for all states except California. So once you get a score, you can usually transfer that to whatever state you're going to be applying to. Yeah, so you don't take it once. It doesn't matter. You don't have to take it in an individual state. No, and we'll get all that detail. We got a lot more test information coming soon. So, okay. So what we're going to talk about today now is licensing requirements in Minnesota. Remembering that if you're going to go to other states, you're going to have to talk to that state directly or look on their website. These are Minnesota requirements. So Minnesota Practice Act in statute is 148E. There's this nice link right on our website to the revisor's office. You can look at the whole statute from there. This Practice Act does cover title and practice. So what that means, if anybody uses the title of social worker or social work somewhere in their title, they have to be licensed by the state of Minnesota. If you're practicing social work as defined in statute, and you have a degree in social work, even if your title is not social worker, you have to be licensed. The Social Work Practice Act is written for the individual. So if you're a case manager, if you're a care coordinator, if you're a mental health practitioner, and you have your degree in social work, more than likely what you're doing in that position is defined as social work and law. You're going to need a license to do that job. Even if your coworker has their degree in psychology, they don't have to have a license to do the same exact job because they're not under our jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction over you because you'll have your degree in social work. So your responsibilities fall because of that. So if you look at that definition, I think there's a single page on your table. I copied that for you. There is actually a nice handout student handbook. That's where that came from on our website. It's got 25 pages of this and more information if you're interested in looking at that in the future. So if you look at that definition, just briefly give it a glance, especially subdivision 11, because that's where your practice or scope of practice falls in. Just kind of look that over. What are your first impressions? Always just like, so what don't we do? If you look at that definition, it's very, very broad. It's in-person or electronic kind of contact with your clients. It's direct practice with clients. It's indirect practice, meaning it could be assessment of programs. It could be advocacy. Case management is actually listed in there as social work. You could be teaching. George is practicing social work by teaching you social work educational things. So there's a lot of things in there that fall under the definition of social work practice. So again, the board really is stressing it's your responsibility as an individual, not an agency responsibility, because you're going to go look for jobs in a few months and they're going to say you don't need a license to do this job. And they're correct. You don't need a license to do their job. But because you are now social workers, educated as social workers, you probably need to have your license. It's your responsibility under this Practice Act to do that. Does that make sense? We hear a lot. People say, my employer said I don't need to have my license. But they don't from their perspective. We don't have any jurisdiction over agencies. Clinical practice, as BSWs, you are currently not authorized to do any clinical practice. So no using differential diagnosing, no therapies based on that with your degree, your undergraduate degree. But everything else in subdivision 11 can fall into your job. So again, if we would look at, say, unlicensed practice, if someone says, someone in my agency should be licensed and they're not, we'd first look to see, okay, are they practicing in Minnesota? Okay. There are exemptions I'm going to tell you about next of people that don't have to be licensed. We're going to look at the title. If you're going to use the title social worker, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the scope of your practice as based on that definition we've been looking at. If it's professional or not. We're going to look to see what your degree is. So those persons with degrees in social work, undergraduate or graduate, are under our jurisdiction. And the board has been looking at unlicensed practice and bringing that more to the forefront within the profession itself. So if we would find that it is part of our compliance process, not just unlicensed practice with other things, but the board can require you to be licensed even if your agency doesn't. And then we do enforce unlicensed practice, and it can be part of a corrective or disciplinary action if on a case-by-case basis as we look at that. So what we're doing today will give you the knowledge and the procedures on how to avoid being unlicensed in your practice. We'll talk about that coming up. Any questions on that, on the definition, how we determine if you're under our jurisdiction or not, anything we've covered so far? Okay. So as usual, there's always exemptions or exceptions to law, and there are currently exempted settings. That's what it's called in statute, where you're not required to be licensed. You can voluntarily license, but you're not required. And right now, you're not under our jurisdiction. Your school's responsible for your practice and your internships, so you're not required to be licensed. If you work for a federally recognized tribe, you are under their jurisdiction as a sovereign nation. You're not subject to state law at that point. You can certainly voluntarily license, but you're not required to be. If you have another license type, if you're an LADC, you could practice under that instead of getting yourself a social work license. You would not identify yourself as a social worker, but you could work under that type of license. If you work for a city, county, or state agency, it is voluntary to be licensed, so you're not required at this point in time to be licensed. Many social workers are in those settings, but are not. They are exempt from licensure requirements. And there's a part of our statute, it's a small little clause that says if you work for a private nonprofit agency, primary service focus is ethnic minority populations, and you yourself are a member of an ethnic minority population served, you could choose not to be licensed. It's voluntary again, very specific kind of exemption. So those are current exemptions. Now this exemption changes that just went into effect. Effective July of 2016, so in the future, any newly hired employee in a city, state, or the private nonprofit agency we just talked about has to be licensed. So essentially what changed is we modified the statute with a future date of full enactment, saying everybody but in a county setting has to be licensed if they're as of that date and time. It's future oriented, so it gives people currently in those positions time to get licensed and do that. So that's why it's a future date like that. So what that allows is this grandfathering period of time that's in statute that will allow people currently in those positions, I won't go through the details, they can apply for licensure without taking the exam or without even having a social work degree if they're in those settings doing social work practice. County social workers, however, are not eligible because their exemption is not changing. You might hear that if you work in a county. There's been some confusion out there. So by 2016 of July, only one setting will be exempt other than the tribes, which is federally recognized tribes, is this county will be the only exempt setting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Doing so, right, and they're working with vulnerable, very vulnerable populations. Social work licensure came into effect in 1989 against some much opposition at the time. So essentially, these are compromises made on bills for groups that are not supportive of licensure. When it first started, it was almost everybody. It was school social workers, hospital social workers, county workers did not have to be licensed. And then it went on, and then we added hospital, and then we added, I don't know, so groups got added in as time went on with a grandfathering type of period like this. And now we went back to legislation just two years ago, I think it was, that, yeah, and the counties were still opposed to removing this exemption. So our bill was modified to not include them in this change. So it's kind of a work in, it's fun, if you're really interested in the legislative process, follow a bill like that, because it's full of controversy. You can see what happens to your bill once the author's name gets put on it and how it changes. Yep. Are there more questions?
So if you work in a city or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and you have a degree and you're grandfathered in,
Mhm.
does that mean that you get your license then?
Mhm.
Or is it
Correct. Yep. Yep. City agency.
okay?
There's very few city social workers. There are a few, and surprising. Some cities hire them directly. So, and state, like, so it'd be like all your state Department of Human Services, all your regional treatment centers, all your schools, University of Minnesota campuses, those
So you would apply to get your license and
not have to take the exam, right? Yep. And that's for that limited time period in that, so. So you could, potentially as you graduate and get a job in an exempt setting, you could fall into this period of time.
So, since like they can just apply for the licensure, do they get any other professional training to get them? They're not practicing.
No, they have to be practicing social work. Yeah, they can't just get a license because they're in that setting. They have to be actually doing social work. Yeah, but it allows persons without degrees to get one. And they're actually, if you go through, you'll find people still through previous grandparenting periods who have degree or don't have degrees in social work but have social work licenses because they came in that way. But they have to be actually practicing social work in those settings that are where the exemption's going away. And there's time frames attached to that and how many months you have to be practicing and that kind of thing. So that's the newest change. Well, not the newest, actually. We'll talk about a newer change that came through law. So again, it's a bill. It's not a bill till it comes out of session with a signature on it and gets to the revisor's office. So, any other questions on exemptions or anything like that? Okay. So we'll talk about what Minnesota has for licensure types. We have 4 licenses. There's a LSW for the Bachelor's of Social Work. This is one you guys will be eligible for soon, right? Graduation's in May. Coming up soon. If you decide to go on to a graduate level kind of work and you get an MSW, then the next license eligibility you would have would be LGSW, Licensed Graduate Social Worker. And then Minnesota has 2 independent types of licensure. They're not on a linear track. It just depends on your scope of practice. My license type is an LISW because I've got my master's degree and I got my 4,000 hours of supervised experience, but non-clinical practice. So I'm an LISW. If you go into clinical social work, and as a master's degree person, then you could go to an LICSW. So it's really dependent on your scope of practice. Those are the license. We're going to talk about LSW. This slide's in here for you for heads up if you're going on to graduate school. If you go to graduate school in Minnesota, all the schools know about this. If you go outside of Minnesota, they're not going to know about this. So when you do an MSW program, if your goal is to be a licensed independent clinical social worker in Minnesota, you're going to have your school or you be able to support that you've had this kind of distribution of training in your MSW or academic training. 360 clinical clock hours in these different knowledge areas. I don't know if you've talked to anybody who's in it, St. Thomas has a grid. All the University of Minnesota, they all have them. All 5 programs have a grid to show which courses do fulfill those requirements. But it's something for you just to be aware of when you talk to schools. Even if you talk to schools out of state, take it with you if you think you're coming back here and say, can you help me determine which courses can do this for me? So most of your hours are going to come from your MSW program, but as advanced standing MSWs, you may have to work your schedule to include electives to cover the parts that won't be covered by the classes you're not taking as an advanced standing person. We find some students are having short hours because it's not in their graduate program. So, but that's kind of working itself out now as the years go by, which is good. So you can do that through most of your hours through MSW. You can take extra graduate coursework from a different school or a different college in your school, as long as it's graduate level coursework, or 90 hours of continuing education with a post-test and a course description for review for the board. So those are the options. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. That's for in the future. Take it with you. Keep it in the back of your mind. Talk to your schools, for graduate schools that you're looking at admissions for if you're interested in that. Questions so far? Anything we've covered in the general stuff? Okay. So now we're going to talk about how you get your license. We're going to have 2 parts to this part. There'll be how to get licensed, and then once you're licensed, what do you do to maintain that license? So here's how you start that process. So your first step, and this is my warning of my money slides, so it cost you some money. You can ask for graduation money to do this. You need to apply for licensure with a board. You can apply right at our website. We have online services that allows you to apply with an online application. Your application fee is $45, and then you also need to do a background check. The board's background check is required, so it's another $15 for BCA. So $60 total to start the application. That comes with, you fill out the form. It's pretty short and easy to do online. You may apply before you graduate. You don't have to be done with school, or you can wait if you think you're not going to be working for a while. If you don't want to take your exam right away, or you want to go travel for 6 months, you certainly can do that. It's really depending on your situation. But you can just report your graduation date on the application. It takes us 30 to 60 days, 30 to 45 days to get the process going. We're always busy, especially now with grandfathering applications coming in, and all the new grads. So there's your school and many other schools that are graduating, so the applications do pick up this time of year. So once we receive your application and your background check, authorization, release of authorization, if you do it online, you have to download it, sign it, and send it to the board so we can release the information. We will send you a letter of approval to take the exam, and then you will contact ASWB directly to pay your exam fee. ASWB is the Association of Social Work Boards. It's their exam. $230 are paid directly to them for the exam. It's the exam fee. Once you do that, you'll get a confirmation via email from them that you can now register for the exam. And you do that with Pearson VUE, which is a test administrator. There's all this information will be in your letter from them on where you can register for that. Anyway, general guideline is give yourself no more than 6 months from graduation. Your application is good with the board for 1 year. So you have 1 year of time to manage without having to pay another $45. So save yourself $45. Be ready to take the exam. If you do happen to fail, you have a 90-day wait. So there's 3 months right there. That's ASWB's policy. 3 months of your 12 months. So kind of manage that, how that will work for you and close to your graduation. So then you do that. So you've done your application, you've paid your application fee, you've done your background check release, you paid ASWB for your exam, you got your exam scheduled, and you took it and you passed it. Now you got to finish your degree, so make sure there's no incompletes hanging out there and get those done. And then once you get your official transcript, make sure your school sends, once that's posted, make sure the official one comes to the board. You'll have to go through your registrar's office for that procedure. Don't send it too soon. Sometimes you'll get those that aren't ready, really official transcripts, but once your degree is posted, we need that from the school. And you're still not licensed, so don't go out there and get a job without that license yet. So you've done everything except we finally get your transcript. Your one last fee is your actual license fee. We will send you a letter. It's $81 for every 2 years for an LSW. It's going to be prorated based on your first renewal period is probably not going to be exactly 24 months because we will send you a letter 2 years out. So if you apply in 2013, it's going to be 2015 in your birth month is when you will renew. So it may be 20 months, it might be 26 months, depending on where that month falls for you. So the $81 is prorated on the number of months, but it's always a 24-month renewal period after that. So it's actually a bargain when you think about it, $81 for 2 years. It's cheaper than coffee. And then there is the OET fee. That's a 10% surcharge put on every license. If you look closely when you buy your tabs, you're probably paying it already. It's something that's been attached to every license that's issued in Minnesota. And it's something that went into effect when Governor Pawlenty was in office, creating an enterprise technology system for the state of Minnesota. So it's funding that project. So you'll pay the $8.10 on top of that. Once we receive that fee, that is the official date of your license. And we will send you a wall certificate and a card for your wallet with your license number on it, information on when you renew again, how many CE hours you're going to need. So keep that handy. So that is the full process. So you got to apply, sign the background check, pay the fee for the exam, take the exam, pass the exam, get your official transcript to the board, and your license fee to the board. And then you have your license. Any questions on that procedure? Yes, George?
I would highly recommend everybody start thinking about getting the process done.
Mm-hmm.
All of it can be done except for your transcript.
Right.
Because the minute your transcript gets closed,
Yep.
otherwise you're delaying it. So and all the stuff is material for everybody.
Right.
I think it's really helpful to think about doing it now, picking up,
Yeah.
before we start to schedule exams already at the
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are sometimes we've had people say it's been 3 or 4 weeks waiting for a exam seat. Because they do not just social workers, it's all licensing. The Pearson VUE is not, it's a generic, it's like a testing center, so it's not just social workers. So it could be a ways to get that done too. Mm-hmm.
So is it the same process that you're going through grad school?
If you need to have a license during graduate school, you would need to do that. If you're not going to be working at all as a social worker and go straight to school, you could wait until you finish your master's in social work and do that. So it's really depending on your situation. Mm-hmm. It's really an online, it's like a renewal. We call it a renewal application, and then you get a reminder card every 2 years. It's time to renew. $81 fee for your renewal fee, and fill out the form, report your CEs, report any supervision, and we'll tell you how to do that. Yeah, just kind of an ongoing or every other year procedure. Yep, we'll talk about how to get a temporary, cover that time. Any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of sites in Metro, and you can go outstate. You can, even if you live in a different state or on a border, you can test it anywhere that they have an office. You don't have to be in Minnesota. Oh, you've got them all for them? Yeah. They've been adding sites, and I think they've got foreign countries, so if you want to go travel the world, you can stop in Italy and take your test. Oh, I went way too far back here. Let's see where we are. Must have been pushing the button. Any questions on any other application stuff? It's a different test, yeah. Mhm.
Wait, so if we do the LGW, do we have to take something?
Only if you need your LSW,
Only if you get only if you need
if you're going to be practicing. Straight to school and not working, yep. You won't. Nope, not for school. Mm-mm, not a school internship.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Nope. Okay, so yeah, if you're not going to, if you think you're not going to be practicing, that's why it's an individualized decision. If you're going to go directly to school, you can go, you don't, and not think you're going to practice social work at all while you're in graduate school, you don't need to do an LSW license. It's not a linear type of licensure for the 4 licenses. So it really depends on what you want to do. If you're going to work part-time, even though when you're getting an MSW, so you're going to do overnight, whatever, and it tends to be social work, or you're going to do a crisis line or something, you're probably going to need a license to do that piece. So it really depends on what you're doing. So, and we'll talk about the exams, the different types of exams there are. So, okay. So this is licensure at the bachelor's level we're talking about right now. Okay. Yep. There's nothing in statute that says you have to be paid to do social work. That's no comment on this. So it's paid or unpaid. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like if, so if you apply for an exam and you have your license, don't you need that supervision?
Yes. If you're practicing.
Even if you're volunteering, you still have to.
Yes. If you're volunteering and it's social work, yeah, that position could be considered social work, and you would get supervision for that. Right. But we'll get into supervision in a little bit. Some places offer supervision, though, as part of their agency. So, okay. So we've got that figured out. You know, everybody knows how to apply for licensure. We're talking about getting an LSW. So we'll talk about the exam itself a little bit. I think George's got a lot more information for you when I'm done. It is the Association of Social Work Boards. It is the group, the National Association, that this is their exam. It's their proprietary exam. There are 4 levels of the exam. There's the bachelor's level, which you're going to be taking. There's the master's level for new MSW grads. There's an advanced generalist exam. That'd be for an LISW, licensed independent social worker, kind of a macro practice advanced generalist after you've done some practice. And there's an clinical exam for the LICSW after you have your master's degree and you've done the 2 years of clinical practice. Those are the 4 types, and then obviously exam content will vary based on the exam type you're taking. On ASWB's website is a really nice outline for at least percentages of what you should be looking at for content in your exam. It's outlined for each type of exam. So you're going to look at the bachelor's exam is what you want to look at. Exam security, that's always my little bullet to say, expect to be fingerprinted and handprinted and have your picture taken when you go take your exam. And if you want a bathroom break, expect to be fingerprinted and handprinted when you leave and fingerprinted and handprinted when you come back. They keep the security very tight. Make sure your name on your application matches your name on your driver's license. They will not let you in the door if they are in any way not the same. So it has to be your legal name that gets you in the door. Mm-hmm. It has to be whatever name we have on your application that you're reporting as your legal name has to match what ID gets you in the door at the exam place. We don't look at social, no.
No, you won't be finding it into the debt.
The Social Security?
A social security card can be second ID, but
They have to match, yeah.
unless you have a document. Do the same case ID?
You're,
You have to put it as your last name that's on your card. Okay. You might want to work on that.
yeah, it could keep you out of the exam. If names are not, if there's discrepancy in any kind of name, then it will keep you out.
If you do a legal name thing, if you have a court document that shows that, you can bring that with the other name.
With the photo ID, yeah. Mhm. So, okay, so just to be fair warned that there's exam security put on that at Pearsonville. You have a proctor in your room watching you take the test and that kind of thing, so expect that to happen. The exam itself, I said, was administered by Pearson VUE, which is a test administration company. It's 150 question multiple choice on a computer. You actually end up answering 170 questions because there's always study questions that they're doing reliability and validity studies on. You're scored on 150. You don't know which 150, so you want to answer them all. You have 4 hours to complete the exam. It's very self-explanatory. You can take a little tutorial if you want, but it's sitting at a desktop with a mouse and you're answering multiple choice questions. Minnesota's passing score is 75, and it is not a percentage. It is a scaled and weighted score by ASWB to meet our requirements for numbers. My story I always tell is if I go to Moorhead and say, I'm going to take my test in North Dakota because they only need a 70. It's the same number of questions correct that's weighted and scaled by ASWB to meet each statutory requirement. There's several versions of each exam going around, so someone taking one version might only have to answer 107 questions right. Someone else might have to answer 112 right, depending which version of the course you're taking. But it could be 120, I don't even know. But I think there's information on ASWB's website, a lot of information about frequently asked questions about the exam, so it's a good place to look. And you can, again, like I said, take the test in any spot where they have a testing site. It doesn't have to be in Minnesota. You'll just make sure it gets coded to have the score come to Minnesota because you're applying with Minnesota. And it's Monday through Saturday, so if you're flexible, it's usually and able to drive maybe a little bit, you should be able to get a seat fairly quickly. So, testing tips, I'm going to let you guys kind of look at this because I'm sure George is going to cover a lot of this. This is stuff that we just kind of took out of ASWB's information. Essentially, I took the LISW not so long ago, probably a couple years ago, and really you just need to look at the question, read that scenario very carefully, kind of dissect it, see who your client is, what's the case, what's the scenario going on here. You have limited information. You got to base your decision what's in your question. Don't assume things. Kind of look through every multiple choice answer you have before you pick one. And always answer every question, even if you don't have a clue, because anything left unmarked is a wrong answer. The computer system does allow you, if you really want to think about a question and get nervous about time, put a little check mark next to it, and it'll take you back and keep moving through the exam, and then it'll take you back to your marked questions at the end. So you have time to get through the whole exam. Mm-hmm.
Do you find out right away if you passed or
Mm-hmm. I'll ask you about 3 times, are you really, really done? Yes, yes, yes. Congratulations, you pass. And then you get an
Do a survey in between. It drives you crazy.
Oh, I forgot about the survey. And you'll get a little unofficial score report you take with you. Yep. And then we get the official score probably a week or 10 days later, sent directly to the board. So that's part of that. So, other tips, just kind of read that question really carefully. What's the best? So look for qualifiers like the most, the least, the first, the last. That's very important to look at that. Don't support any stereotypes. Your client always first. Might not be relevant to the situation. Kind of look at each of your choices and eliminate the real ones that don't fit first. And I'll let George talk more about the exam. He got a lot more examples than I do. So there are study guides available. There's one, ASWB offers a 50-question study guide that is, I think, very reliable, because that's what I did for both of my LG and my LISW, and could see where my needs were for study. You can purchase a full-sized exam online, have access to it for 1 month through ASWB. So if you want to practice sitting at a computer 4 hours, timing yourself, that kind of thing, you can certainly do that. You can do that through for as many times as needed for the month. And then there's exam review course. George will probably tell you more about. There's a workshop you can attend that we know of here. So there's a lot of study guides and things available. So, and you're fresh out of school and you're going to do great, because Minnesota always does really good. First-time test takers, very good. Temporary license. Remember we had that discussion about unlicensed practice. Here's a way to avoid your unlicensed practice, and you can start right after school. Start practicing. So you have a job, your internship loves you, and they want you to start Monday after graduation. So you can do that. You have to apply for a temporary license, though. This is one more application. So essentially what this is, covering that waiting for the official transcript time. You have to have applied for permanent licensure like we talked about before, done the background check, took your exam and passed, finished all your degree requirements, and we're just waiting for that official transcript. So it's a call the board. We'll send you that out right away. It's a paper application, a couple pages. It is a $50 fee, but we get those turned around really quickly. And you can't start practicing and then ask for one. So make sure you get it to us, get that request first before you start your job. And it will be good for 6 months, and that gives us that time for us to get that application or that official transcript from your school to us, get your permanent licensure in effect. You can start your supervision requirement during this time, so the time you're practicing will count towards that requirement, which I'm going to give you details about shortly. The other license type we have in our statute is a provisional license. And for this one, you must have applied for permanent licensure. You've finished all your requirements. You've done you applied for permanent licensure, took the exam, but could not get a passing score on it. And you speak English as a second language, and you're foreign born. You can apply for a provisional license. For what this means is you will have to practice for an additional 2,000 hours under supervision for this license before a permanent license will be issued. If this seems to be your situation, call the board. Again, it's a paper application that you'll need to do with the board. Questions on how to get licensed at all? Exam questions, anything? Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if it's
Uh-huh.
the score is 75.
Uh-huh.
Hypothetically, how many get wrong?
Well, again, it depends on which version of the exam you're taking. They'll tell you on your ASW thing you needed 115 correct answers to pass, or they'll tell you. But it's weighted and it's scaled, so it really depends on this version of the exam you're taking.
The exam will tell you how many you need, right?
No, not beforehand. You just got to answer them all right. But it's not a straight percentage. No, it's not it's not a percentage of 150. It's a very scaled kind of score. They always say compare it to Fahrenheit and Celsius. Same thing, different number. So, yes. Most of them you have to pay for, unless you've got friends that have stuff from last year, or some schools. I don't know if your library has some old stuff on file. Some of the reference libraries, some of them do. Yeah. There was a big practice analysis done, was it 2011? When did it change the exams? 10? Yeah, some of they would be helpful, but they're not going to be exactly the same because they did a big revamp of the exams not too long ago. So.
If you, like you said, start work like the day after graduation, when should you apply for that temporary license in order for that? Does that have like processing time?
Yep, so I would say once you're done You've taken your final exam. You're done with your, whatever is required for your degree. Get that application. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so everybody's got that down. So you've got your license. You paid all that money. You got $60 to the board. You did your background check. Paid $230 for that exam, and you passed it with flying colors. Got that temporary license if you needed, and then you got the permanent licensure done. So you got your last licensure fee, and you have your license now. What we will do once we actually happens, when you do your permanent license fee, when that comes to the board, your effective date is the date we receive that licensure fee of $81. And we will send you a wall certificate and a card for your wallet that will tell you what your license number is, when your next renewal is, how many continuing education hours you need, all that stuff. So that will be coming to you. So now you've got that. Now we're going to talk about what you have to do to maintain your license. The first big one is supervision. Once you have your license, you must have your first 4,000 hours should be under supervision. 4,000 hours is equivalent to 2 years of full-time practice. I don't know, I'm leaning on this thing. So what it is, it's a non-clinical supervision that you'll have a formal contract essentially with your supervisor. You'll meet monthly with that person, and it's continuous over those 4,000 hours. You have to have 100 hours total once your 4,000 hours are done. So it equates to 4 hours for every 1 month of full-time practice, or in statute it's written as 4 hours for every 160 hours of practice, because you could be working part-time. And so essentially you're prorated. If you're half-time, it'll be 2 hours a month. If you're three-quarter time, it's 3 hours a month. So, but it has to be continuous over those first 4,000 hours of your practice. Your types of supervision you can have, of your 100 hours, 50 of them have to be individual supervision. And of that 50, 25 minimum have to be in person with your supervisor. The other half can be what's called in statute electronic eye-to-eye media while maintaining visual contact, Skype, Google, whatever. But it has to be secure. Remember, you're talking about client situations and scenarios, so you have to always maintain your confidentiality and that kind of thing. But you can use that. You're not obligated to, but it is an option for you. But at least 50 hours have to be individual, 25 actually in person. So you could do them all in person if you wanted, but those are your options. The other 50 can be one-on-one on the telephone, or a group. You can do 50 hours of group. Your group has to be 6 members or less for your licensing supervision group. Doesn't have to be all social workers. Many people have interdisciplinary teams at work. If your social worker if your supervisor is a social worker, they could certainly use that time if it meets the other criteria and the group size. And no email is considered that. So you have options. It can be all individual. It could be half individual. It could be electronic eye-to-eye. It could be some phone. It could be some group. Whatever works best for you and your supervisor. And some of the other options were actually put into statute for persons if you end up going in a rural area. You might not be able to find somebody close by. You might have to travel to do the individual. So this allows you to do the groups or do the phone to get some of that done. So those are the types. And how you document this to the board. There's a supervision plan form. You will choose the non-clinical. They're on the website. You can download that. You have 60 days once you start practicing to get this plan developed. So you want to start working on that when you get hired. If this would never come to the board 2 years out, remember you renew every 2 years. You pay that $81 and do your CEs. If that's not on file with the board those 2 years later, you could be assessed a $40 late fee. That's part of the statute. Even if it takes more than 60 days, get it in as soon as it's ready before you have to renew. And then your supervisor will have to attest they've completed licensing supervisor requirements. That's in statute. And then when you renew your license, so now you have your plan, the board will process your plan and send you a letter says, yep, it looks like it complies and you can use it for your supervision. 2 years later, when you renew, you fill out a supervision verification form, non-clinical, 2 different forms That will tell us how many hours you've completed to date. They don't have to be done, just tell us how much you've completed from the date you were licensed to your next renewal. And if you're not quite done with 4,000 hours, you just continue on into your next renewal period till it's complete. Questions on that? Supervision plans, verifications? Yep.
So I'm in the process of working with a church in Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
starting our own residential thing.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm a supervisor, so does that mean I can't?
Are you going to be practicing in Kansas City? You're outside the Minnesota Board of Social Work jurisdiction. So you would have to check with Kansas City to see if you need to be licensed.
Oh, I do need to be licensed. I did check that.
Okay.
But then for the 4,000 hours, if I'm going to be, I technically will be the supervisor in the church
But you'll be in Kansas City.
outright.
So if you want to apply to Minnesota's requirements, you could ask us to look at it. We have no jurisdiction over that practice. You wouldn't have to even get licensed in Minnesota if you're not going to be in Minnesota to practice.
So I'll just talk to Kansas City.
Correct. Yeah, remember we said it's like state licensure. Our jurisdiction ends at the border, so we don't have any jurisdiction over your practice outside of Minnesota.
I think it's checked because you said to take the test in Minnesota and just transfer it. So I'm
You can.
also licensed in Minnesota.
No, you can do that. You can take the exam. You can and then let your application close. You just never be licensed in Minnesota, or you can just apply with, is it Missouri or whatever state, Kansas, see what they require. You could take it in Minnesota and transfer it down there. So, yeah. Mhm.
If, so say, I graduate, I get the test and I have no licensure after graduation,
Mhm.
but I don't have a job for
Mhm.
18 months,
Yep.
do you estimate that's supervision?
Not till you start practicing. Once you start, then you got the 60 days to get that developed. That's why you probably won't be done. A lot of people aren't done in that first 2-year window of time when you renew. They're not done with the 4,000 hours. You just complete what you can, let us know what you've completed to date, and then continue on.
Oh, so it's not like it's in 2 years?
No, it's no time frame. Just the 4,000 hours is the magic number.
Do the supervision always happen like here in Minnesota? Do the supervisor has to be
Yep. And there are some alternates you can have. I can tell you what those are, but yeah, majority of them every time needs to be with a licensed social worker in Minnesota. Mhm.
something that you were living right across the border?
Right. That you. Yeah. There's not necessarily.
Okay.
I'll give you those changes. Okay. Okay.
So if you get a job where there's nobody who's licensed as a supervisor, are there places we can go to look
Mhm.
for supervision?
Yep, the board has on their website, if you search license, the search verify a license button, we have a little, you can click on there to see which persons have attested they've met supervision requirements. They won't, it's not necessarily that they're offering supervision, but you could contact those people. NASW has a website, or a spot on their website where they've kind of combined some supervision resources for places that are offering licensure supervision. So that'd be a good place to start. Or it's turn people back to their schools. Is there something, their BSW program, I have a list of alumni who are willing, or that kind of thing, yeah. So, because they don't have to be in your agency to do supervision. We'll kind of get some of the more details. Any other questions? Yep.
So like if you work for a year
Mhm.
and you go to grad school,
Mhm.
what happens to those when you don't have 4,000?
That's fine. You just tell us you're not working anymore. You're going to school, and you report what you've completed. You probably will never complete the LSW requirement then, because you'll be going on and starting your MSW requirement. You don't have the 4,000 hours done, and that's fine. Because then if you're going to apply for, get the MSW and get the LGSW, start over with the supervision required at the master's level. Yeah. So there's no time frame attached. A lot of people work part-time. Like I said, some people don't get jobs right away. Some people take leaves of absence from their position. So you're not going to be done necessarily in 2 years. So you have to have 4,000 hours of practice total while you're in LSW. And then you're done with supervision. And just keep renewing and doing continuing education at that point. Or you change your license type and start again with supervision. Okay? Any other questions on supervision? We're going to move in and tell you a little more about how your supervisors and what they have to be. And if you look at the plan, it gets a little more self-explanatory, what you need to do. So your supervisor, like we said, provides you evaluation and direction of your practice. It can be someone in your agency or it can be off-site, someone that's not working in your agency. Must be a social worker licensed at the appropriate level. So, and the other option we were kind of alluding to, 25% of your time can be with an alternate supervisor who is a mental health professional licensed by their own licensing board, like an LP, LMFT, LPCC. Well, there's a whole list of them in statute of mental health professional. The other option that's also not on the slide is if you're on a border, you can use all your supervision with someone licensed in another state. So, and it's the 5 states surrounding Minnesota and Manitoba. So it's kind of whatever's around our state. Licensed social workers in those jurisdictions would be accepted as supervisors. So LSW's majority of your time, unless you're able to use the alternate part of it, will be with, you have to have an LSW who's completed their own 4,000 hours of practice, so that's on file with the board. Someone's been an LSW at least 2 years full-time with their supervision complete, or any of the graduate level, LGSW, LISW, LICSW, licensed social workers. So even a LGSW might be in their own supervision for their master's work. They could do your supervision for your bachelor's license. So it can go that way. And all supervisors who are all the licensed social workers in Minnesota, regardless of type, if you're offering supervision, you have to have 30 hours of training in supervision. One-time requirement that has to be done before you start supervision. And then your content, and these are all on the plan. You'll assure that these are the things you're going to be including in your supervision. So it's based on your practice. It's not necessarily just employment supervision. That's why the board does allow outside supervision. Because you're going to talk about things about authorized scope of practice, your skills, your continuing competency, professional values and ethics. Those types of things are woven into your supervision. Any questions on that supervision you can think of? 4 hours for every month of full-time practice. Some people have to contract outside again. Like we said, there's resources available to look at that. So, yes. It ranges. I've seen a range depending if it's individual or group. It can go from $25 to $100. Normally it's not $100. I don't see it bachelor's level as much. It's more the clinical level, but people can charge over the market's supporting. So, okay.
The group is generally cheaper.
Yeah.
An hour by time with 6 of you would be.
Right. Right. So take advantage of the 50 hours of group you can do. Yeah. Any other questions on supervision? Okay. Yes.
So it sounds like you can actually have it with
Mm-hmm.
different supervisors.
Yep. You can have as many supervisors as you need. There's no limit. So and actually that happens a lot. People have their individual supervisor and a group supervisor. Yeah. I have one agency, not to be named, that does rotating group supervisors of 6 of them. So we have a lot of supervision plans and a lot of supervision verification forms for one person. So, but yeah, there's no limit. Your plan will only have room for 2. Just make more copies of that second page if you have more than 2 supervisors. So don't feel limited by the form. So, any other questions on supervision? Now we'll talk about the other big piece that continues as long as you hold your license is your continuing education requirement. So at your license renewal, you have to have 40 hours of continuing education, and an hour is an hour. It's a clock hour. So that would be what you would report when you renew your license. Again, remember I said we prorate your first renewal period because it might not be 24 months. It might be 26 or 20 or 18, depending on when your birth month is. We prorate that fee, and we also prorate the number of CEs, and that'll all be on your card that you get in the mail. Of your 40 hours, 2 of them have to be in ethics, social work ethics. And if you're going to be offering supervision, which you will have to wait until you finish your own supervision, so right now it wouldn't apply, but in the future, if you're going to do supervision for somebody, you have to have 6 of your 40 hours in supervision. So those are the defined content. All the rest is something that you would choose if your general interest or how it applies to your job. CEs do not have to be pre-approved by the board. So the options you have on fulfilling this is looking at the list on our website of providers. We don't look at their programs. We will pre-approve providers that attest they meet our requirements. There's a list on our website of those providers. So you have to contact them to see whether they're offering any workshops or anything. ASWB and NASW, the national, any of those pre-approved programs or providers we would accept. And then any program where it meets CE requirements, essentially meaning you have a qualified presenter, someone has some expertise in the field, it's relevant to social work practice, it meets that criteria, not necessarily business or procedures or something outside of social work education. The example I normally use is, and we split hairs on this one too, is if you're in a hospital and you have to do bloodborne pathogens, is that continuing education for a social work educated person? It's helpful. CPR is helpful. It's not necessarily education for social work. So it has to be related to practice. Mm-hmm. Yep. Doesn't have to be in Minnesota. You get lucky enough to get an agency to send you to San Francisco for a wonderful conference or something, that'd be great.
There's an annual summer one in Cape Cod.
Yeah. Yeah, Nova Scotia, they have some nice stuff up there too. So you can actually, if you get your LSW, so you decide to go, and then you decide to go to graduate school, you have your LSW, all your graduate level coursework could be applied towards your CEs for your LSW. Remember, these have to be education hours received from licensure forward, so none of your BSW classes apply. But if you go to graduate school, you could use that. Any workshops, conferences, you guys do Day at the Capitol, and they offer workshop or breakout sessions. That's all CE related. If you go to MSSA, they have 2-day workshops, lots of hours you can get there. Anything like that would apply. Any programs, staff training they do. If you work for a county or state, you're going to get a ton of things that DHS offers. Actually, a lot of trainings, that types of things is relevant to social work. Independent study, you can do 15 hours of your 40 independent study. And that means you can go on the web and go CEs for social workers and everything pops up. And if you can do those self-study types of courses towards 15-hour maximum, you can do research on your own. You come back to your school's social work reference library and read social work journal articles for 15 hours. And write that down. The dates you did that, and the titles and authors, and a little synopsis of what you read, how it applies to your practice, and how many hours you did that in. That would be your documentation for independent study. So some people say it gets too expensive. Like, remember the independent study piece, because that's kind of a good, or I'm short hours, you got time to do some independent study. So that's a good option. And then when you renew, like I said, you report your hours, just report the number of hours on your renewal application. And then we do audit on a random basis, and it's after you renew. So keep a folder at least a year with all your certificates of attendance, any documentation that proved that you did the workshop or conference or the independent study. If you get audited, you need to send all that information to the board. Questions on CEs? Supervision, anything that pop in your head yet? Okay, we're almost done. This is just a few slides on compliance process and types of things we see as violations of standards and things that come to the board as complaints. We do receive complaints from all over. They come from applicants. You have to self-report certain things. You can report a colleague. Your clients may call the board and leave a complaint. So they come from everywhere. And we investigate, or at least start an investigation and look at the complaint as it comes to the board. And there is in statute a disciplinary or corrective action we can take depending on what the situation is. It is, again, done on a case-by-case basis. We have one compliance officer, Lewis Hoffman, and he's our main person that gets things going and working and investigated as needed. Common things, though, that we do see, and they kind of mirror things you probably talk in your ethics class a lot about. Boundary issues, probably the biggest one still. Who is your client? Don't have dual relationships. The onus is on the social worker to say that this is not a harmful dual relationship. So any business relationship, personal, sexual relationships with your clients or the client systems, that will come to the board, and it is something you want to be careful about. Confidentiality of records, who you talk to about a client, getting releases of information, client records, make sure your documentation is timely, all this kind of thing. These are all examples that have come to the board as complaints. Impairment, and I think on your table I left that little brochure about HPSP. You are obligated to report yourself and a colleague and or colleagues if you think there's an impairment that they have that's causing issues with their practice, that there's competency issues, whether it's physical health, mental health, chemical use issues, anything like that. HPSB is an option, so kind of a nice option. You can report to this program instead of the board. If you or your colleague follows you get an assessment. They essentially have case managers follow their requirements and what their suggestions are. You won't have to go through the board's disciplinary or corrective action process. So it's another option other than reporting to the board. But if you don't follow their requirements, that report comes to the board and it starts with the board. So. And that's actually a program not just for social workers. You can use it for if you know any nurses, doctors, chiropractors, pharmacists, any health professional that's licensed uses that same program. Reporting requirements. You have duty to warn. You're a vulnerable adult, maltreatment. Failure to report self-report adverse actions. So if something happens in your practice, you're obligated to tell the board about it. Unlicensed practice, we talked about that. You're obligated to report that if you would see that. And then termination of services. What's required for termination. Do you have post-termination contact? Make sure those things are done correctly. These are just kind of common things we see in our types of complaints that we get to the board. That's really all I have. This is how great you guys do in Minnesota. I don't have 2012 numbers yet from ASWB, but first-time test takers nationwide for bachelor's, 78% pass. In Minnesota, 89% of you pass first time. And your schools, they're all individual numbers. They could be even higher, so it depends. So you guys will do well on that. And that's all I have. Any questions? Final things, thoughts? So y'all know, has anybody applied actually for licensure yet? Anybody here? Me too. Got one new person. When did you start that? Just recently? Okay. Did you get a letter yet for approval? Okay. It takes time. Yeah. 30 to 60 days. But yeah, I'll go home this weekend and apply. I'll tell Julia to watch for all she's our applications coordinator. So they're all coming from St. Thomas. Watch out. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One of the things I'll just comment on real quick about the board. Oftentimes, boards of social work, and particularly in other states, have a very antagonistic relationship with their licensees. And we actually work really well with our board. They listen to us, they take advice, they give us suggestions. And there's a really nice working relationship. So the Minnesota board is great. So,
Thank you.
thank you. In fact, most boards wouldn't do things like this presentation.
That's true.
So. Okay, you ready for a break, right?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, go take a break. Let's start back. Go at 5 or 10? Okay, we'll save 5 minutes. I know it'll be 10, right?
Well, I was told this was gonna talk about other states too. Right, and so I looked at that, and I think that New York tax class, and that's, I know how to apply everything. I looked at the site and all that.
They just don't name it correct.
There you go. Yeah, no problem.
I mean, I 100%.
I don't like ask
And I'm going back. Right now,
he asks us too many things outside of his normal work day. And he's asking stuff on his own time. He says,
oh my goodness, I don't want to repeat any of this. None of this. Especially
Will he win?
I don't know. There's a, you know, well, it's a boundary issue. And it's, if you're on an email for 4 hours.
Thank you.
Right. Email back and forth on a thing. Yeah, maybe he should be compensated for it. I mean, but
If
you know,
you're
how many
doing
times
work.
do I answer a phone call at work and say it's personnel, and I think it's that way too.
The alternative is you're on a salary and you have to work
Yeah,
out
and
the
you have
average.
to, yeah.
Make sure you get treats too, folks. We don't want them to go to waste.
Or they'll have a higher.
Well, good to see you. April 8th. Yeah, 4th or 5th or whatever it is this year, right?
You know why you're for me? Hi Pam. How are you? Good, how are you? Good, you guys. Did you I just got an email, you know, she's like, well, he's I emailed him before, but like, you can get your one before we do your presentation. I thought, how does it sound? And he just sent me, and he's like, sorry, it doesn't sound like to you. It's like, he did that like, see, I thought it was skin doctor. Somebody that works with me.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
But I mean, he's flu or something. I don't like when it's a how far next time I'm going back there, I feel like I might go ahead and do that.
Once I get involved, I really want to help that person.
Me too. I might go to one academy day. You're a box for 23. That's all. I'm not going to be fun until August. I graduated high school last year.
Like, I heard that they're a lover of
I've never
she was so, I mean, her and I were like at first the class was like this call out, and I was like, that best like you would know, or you're going to the hospital, what else?
I feel like
So I had to just like,
Elias Thurman is not.
we were with yesterday, and I was like, I was saying about something that you like, you can bring up the street, you're all good money, and she's like, I mean, she was just like joking, I mean, so he's got like this little like
Okay, on everybody's table is my handout, so make sure you grab one. If I didn't stick enough on the table, let me know. Did everybody get one? No. That's what happens when you don't listen to directions. Yeah. Okay, as Jane said before, my name's George, and I teach usually one graduate course. Some of you I've met. What was it? Oh, we did the panel for the Social Work Club. Yeah. And then I co-direct the IPC, where two of your illustrious colleagues are doing their senior BSW placement. You don't have to hide, Liz. And here it's the other one, so. So we're going to talk about the test part, okay? But I'm going to cover a little bit of stuff that Cheryl talked about as well, okay? So she talked about you have to apply for the license. That will get you approved for sitting for the test, okay? So that's why we're encouraging people, if you're planning to get a license, start now. You know, use some of that leftover second semester loan money or, right, yeah. Okay. How many of you are planning to take how many of you are planning to get licensed in Minnesota? How many of you are planning to get licensed in another state? Okay, so we got Iowa, we have Missouri.
Kansas.
Oh, Kansas City, Kansas. Does anybody live in Kansas City, Kansas? I'm just kidding. And what state are you in? Oh, 2 Iowas, okay. So look at those states' licensing boards about what the process is, okay? And I'll show you a quick and easy way to find access to those boards in a moment here. So then after you get approval, you register to take the exam. You have to sign up with Pearson. Through ASWB, you pick a place where you want to take the test, and then you just take it, okay? Just take it, right? And really the test is focused on social work skills, knowledge, and what are those things we always talk about, the KSAs, knowledge, skills, and values, right? How many times have you heard those three words when people talk about social work? That's what the test is about. And the test is actually designed, the questions are written by social workers who are out there practicing. ASWB has these item writing workshops around the country periodically, and groups of people get together and write questions about what they do as social workers. So things to think about. Plan to arrive at the test site about 30 minutes early. If you're not familiar with where it's located, do a practice drive there. And do a practice drive at the time of day you're scheduled to take the test, okay? Because driving over here just now from the Minneapolis campus where I'm office took me 15 minutes. At 4 o'clock or 4:30, it takes me 40 minutes, right? So know what traffic's like at the time of day you're planning to take the exam. Bring your authorization letter. Make sure you have your ID. We'll talk about the ID in a minute. They'll take your picture. I don't know about the fingerprint. I think Pearson's just using a palm print. And I'll show you where you can get information on how that works. But it's like more secure than pretty much anything else you could do in life, right? It's amazing how much security there is around these things. As we were talking about, the name on your ID has to match the name in your authorization level. Make sure you get rest, okay? In fact, I recommend that people go out and have a nice dinner, have a glass of wine or a beer the night before. Don't, just do something that's going to help you, excuse me, kind of relax and take it easy. I believe that the education you got at St. Thomas St. Kate's School of Social Work will fully prepare you for this exam. Now, would I recommend that you review stuff that you've learned? Yes. But take some time, a couple weeks before, a month before, just start going through all your old materials. You probably don't need anything above and beyond what you had in your classes. As Michelle was talking about, pass rate in Minnesota is really high, right? We do a good job. I think it's that Garrison Keeler thing, right? Where all the children are above average, right? You've heard that line before? Yeah. So don't think about cramming. Get a good night's sleep. Whatever helps you do that. Know where you're going. Wear comfortable clothes. In fact, oftentimes people talk about dressing in layers because you can't leave the facility once you've started. You can't, everything has to go into a locker, right? You can't bring anything in with you. Because again, it's about making sure you're not bringing in stuff that you can cheat with. If you have to go to the bathroom, you can leave to go to the bathroom, but you can't go to the locker. And you have to go through the whole security thing when you come back from the bathroom. And the timer for your test continues to run even if you take a break. Okay? Now, 4 hours is how much time you have. Most people, I'm not going to say all people, most people don't take the full 4 hours. Okay? 3.5 hours is usually what people need. It depends on kind of how and what kind of a test taker you are. Let's see. You'll have to go through an on-screen tutorial at the beginning that kind of helps you figure out how the computer system works. But you can do some of that practice stuff ahead of time at the ASWB website, so that when you show up, you kind of have a good sense of what to expect and what's going on. If you have any problems, okay, with the test, right? You sit down, you're taking the test, and all of a sudden your screen goes blank. Or some reason it doesn't you finish and it doesn't tell you what's happened, report that stuff immediately, okay? I've not heard of any issues with Pearson, but the company they contracted with previously, I had one student who somehow they lost his answers, okay? It took them 3 weeks to find them in their computer system. But for 3 weeks he was like, I don't know if I have to take the test again. It was just kind of a mess. But you can't undo a problem if you don't report it, okay? So they won't compensate you if you don't let them know if you're having a problem. So let them know. Did I say that enough times? Okay. And again, you kind of use common sense about the security systems and stuff. Don't be goofy, right? Don't joke around or something like I would do, don't do that, yeah. So, okay, so locations in Minnesota. Hermantown, Brooklyn Park, Bloomington, Eagan, West Fargo, North Dakota, Eau Claire, Rochester, and for Liz, Davenport, Iowa. Where in Iowa are you going to be? There actually is a location in Sioux City. There's also one in Iowa City and there's one in Des Moines. Wait a minute, or was it Sioux Falls? Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about what's nearby. I think there is a site in Sioux City, otherwise you might have to go to Iowa City. How far is that?
Like 4 hours.
Oh, never mind. Where's Sioux City? Oh, yeah, I know that, like, there's Omaha probably has a site. Okay. You'll find one. Okay. And I'll show you how to find it, okay? You have to have 2 forms of ID. You have to have a government-issued ID with your picture on it, so a driver's license, passport, military ID, green card, government-issued ID, things like that will work. And then the secondary ID, there's a lot of different things you can use, including a school ID, okay? But the names have to match. And if the names don't match, you have to have some kind of documentation why the names don't match. So, for example, if you've changed your name, you should have a court record of that. Or you changed your name because you got married, you should have you bring your marriage license, certificate, whatever you have, okay? Okay. Keep in mind that this is a national exam. How many of you, it sounds like pretty much everybody's from like Iowa, Minnesota. Anybody from like other parts of the country? Where? Okay, that's close. That's upper Midwest, sort of. Well, that's a whole other world, right? The reason I bring that up is that sometimes questions will trip people up, right? And the one that I think of the most often is that this is the land of 10,000 treatment centers. Have you heard that before about Minnesota? Okay. As a social worker, you actually have, within your scope of practice, the ability to practice in the chemical dependency field. Except nobody practices chemical dependency unless they're in a chemical dependency treatment center. Typically. I'm exaggerating a little bit. So people will oftentimes screw up those questions because they think about how do they do it in Minnesota, because that's your experience. And it's like, well, Minnesota isn't the rest of the country. So just keep that in mind. As Michelle talked about, there's 170 questions, only 150 count. You don't know which 20 don't count. And I say that for 2 reasons. A, don't be surprised, and B, if there's a really bad question, just tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to get upset about this question. I'm not going to get worked up about this question. Maybe it's one of the ones they're trying out. Okay. The minute you start fighting with a test, who loses? You do, right? So don't get worked up by questions on the test. Some of the diversity questions are really bad. They've gotten better. But they used to be asked like, you're working with an African-American client, and it was sort of assumed that everybody taking the test, for example, was white. Well, if you weren't and you're reading this question, you'd be like, what are these people talking, what's going on here? So don't worry about any particular question. Don't get too worked up about it. The other thing I would encourage people to do, particularly if you've been out practicing for a while, or have a lot of life experience, that's another way of nicely saying if you're old like me. How come you guys are laughing at that table back there? Don't read into what you would do, okay? In fact, one of the tricks I try and tell people to use is, and except for 2 of you, I would always say things like, what would a social worker in Iowa do? Okay, so you 2 people from Iowa, pick another. What would a social worker in Nebraska do, right? Because the minute you start personalizing it, you're starting to kind of take in your own subjective thoughts and ideas about things, and that's not what this test is looking for, okay? It really is looking for sort of a basic understanding of social work from a basic, broad perspective, a generalist practice, okay? Like I said, all the questions are job-related. You have to have a passing score of 75. It's approximately 112 out of the 150, but because they're weighted, don't assume it's 112. Okay? Depending on which test you're taking, and depending on how it's weighted, it might be a little less than that, might be a little more than that. But that's kind of a ballpark figure. And so what's on the test? Yeah, let me see if there's anything else. Kind of think about giving yourself about 1.5 minutes per question. Okay. And if you're finding yourself spending a lot of time trying to get a question, just mark it. There's a way to mark it on the computer so that you can flag it and come back to it later. Right? So if you're feeling kind of hung up or stuck, move on. And then come back and check the flagged ones. The other thing I was going to say about that is people often say, well, should I go with my first hunch or should I think about it and change my answer after I've thought about it? And there's no right answer to that. The right answer is based on who you are and what kinds of ways in which you handle tests. Okay. Now, we were just talking about this today. We almost do ourselves a disservice because how many of you have had a multiple choice question test in social work? Like sort of kind of maybe one in your 4 years of your social work training? Yeah, right. Right. So if you're quick to answer a question and oftentimes jump to conclusions, it's probably worth going back and looking at it more closely and changing your answer. If you're somebody who pretty thoroughly looks at a question and gives a thoughtful answer, it's probably better to go with that answer that you came up with initially. Okay. But I can't tell you which of those kind of people you are. You have to kind of know who you are for yourself. Okay. Does that help at all, or does that even confuse you more? Okay. So content. About 27% of the test is based on human development, diversity, and behavior in the environment. These classes should all sound familiar, right? You all had classes with these titles in them. Okay. So models of human growth and development, diversity, effects of the environment on client systems. About 28% is on assessment, right? How do you collect a history? How do you make sense of that history? How do you identify problems? Looking specifically at assessment of addictive behaviors, mental and behavioral disorders. Now, that doesn't mean you have to make diagnoses, but you have to be familiar with things like, so what does it mean to be depressed? What are sort of the attributes of depression? Questions about abuse and neglect. Things like direct and indirect practice, right? Most of you are probably right now taking small client systems? No, large client systems, right? Thank you. That was last semester. And so things like indirect practice and some of the pieces that go into that, some of the macro stuff. And then about 19% is around professional relationships, values, and ethics. Right? You've all had lots of stuff on ethics, right? Ethics coming out your ears. But that'll be good because almost 20% of the test is based on those kinds of things. Yeah. So how do they structure these? They're all multiple choice, okay? There is one right answer. There are 3 wrong answers, except they don't call them wrong answers. They call them distractors. They're really wrong answers, okay? I don't know why they call them distractors, but they do. The trick for you is to figure out which is the correct answer. And what you will probably pretty quickly find, because we're going to go through some questions, is that you eliminate 2 answers right away, okay? It's pretty easy to find the 2 distractors. And then it's sort of trying to figure out between 2 other possible answers. Okay. And I'll try and give you some tips to kind of help with that too. They talk about types of distractors, things like answers true but irrelevant to the question. It's too narrow or too broad for the question. It might be a common misperception. Okay. Or it sounds really good, but it really is wrong, right? It'll be like, oh, that sounds really good, but it has nothing to do with anything. So the first thing you need to do is you need to read each question very carefully. This is 90% of the time, this is what hangs people up. Okay. They rush through the question and miss keywords. And there's a lot of questions that will say things like, what's the first thing you would do? What's the most likely thing? What's the least likely? What's most likely going on? Pay attention to those words. There are even questions that will be phrased so that which is the incorrect answer. And the incorrect answer is the correct answer, right? So what wouldn't you do, kind of thing. And then it's helpful to kind of think about what are they talking about? What's kind of the general topic area? And even maybe hypothesize an answer. Some people find that helpful. Some people find that distracting because then they hypothesize an answer and they look at the the four options and they go, oh my God, the one I came up with isn't any of these. So again, it depends on kind of what works for you. Kind of know for yourself who you are. Kind of go through each answer and read through each one carefully to kind of, as I said, you pretty quickly will eliminate two, but there's a few more that the remaining two it's sort of like trying to figure out between two very close answers. And Cheryl said this, sorry, Cheryl. Michelle said this too. Make sure you don't leave unanswered questions. Okay? Because it's not scored on how many you answer, it's scored on the 170. Or the 150 of the 170. And like I said, if you're stuck, skip it and come back to it. Don't waste all your time on a couple of questions. And sort of some tips, and this may have gotten really small on that handout. Can you read this on the handout? Okay, good. So try and choose the answer that's most comprehensive that meets the specifics of the question. Okay. Don't be too broad, don't be too narrow in the answer. When in doubt, favor the client over the agency, and favor health over disease. Right? How many times have you heard somebody say, rule out health conditions first, right? Have you heard that in class? Make sure there's not something medically wrong. So keeping those kinds of things in mind. Choose the answer that preserves life, right? Particularly if it's around questions around suicidality, things like that. Choose an answer that begins where the client is. Are these beginning to sound like some of the key concepts? Yeah. Choose the most expectable answer. Okay. Choose answers that best meet the limits of confidentiality. Okay, and you'll have some questions about mandated reporting and things like that. And again, with some of those kinds of questions, you have to be careful because the law around mandated reporting for vulnerable adults is whose law? Who wrote that law? Minnesota legislature. Okay. So there are sort of universal guidelines that we all think about in social work, but the specifics are state by state. So that they're not going to have a specific unless it's part of a universal theme or concept that all states typically adopt. Okay. Like I'm not sure how many states have rules about financial exploitation. Minnesota does, right? But not everybody does. So you probably won't have something on financial exploitation. Don't choose an answer that supports stereotypes, although some of the diversity questions may feel like stereotypes. Don't choose do-nothing answers, right? You want to typically take a more active role. The one exception is around some of the later stages of group stuff. Okay. Have you had a class on groups? Yeah. And part of this is that the idea that you want the group to sort of deal with the group, not you as the leader to deal with the group. When in doubt, choose assessment over treatment. Rule out medical conditions first. Don't read more into the question than is there. And that I find is another thing that people oftentimes do, right? They start, and you'll get a sense of this when we look at some of these. You'll start saying, well, if this was going on, and if the dad had done this, then it's like, is that anywhere in the question, right? So don't put more in there than is there. Okay, so resources. Michelle was talking about the board's website. Why did it go to there? Let's see if any of these work on this pad. No program is registered. Yeah, okay. We'll go to Plan B here. Okay, I'll get to these, I'll come back to these in a minute. If nothing else, you've got the websites. So the first one is the Board of Social Work for Minnesota's website, which is hard to read now because I tried to click on it and it got really, yeah. The next one is ASWB's website, and there's lots of good information on there about the exam. There actually are a few practice ones. Michelle was talking about the practice manual that you can buy. It's $30. And then there's the online version, which I think is $70. But how many of you know other people in this room? Right? Pool your resources, right? One of you gets $10 from 4 other people and you've got a manual, right? So you can share these resources with each other. How many of you know people that graduated last year? Call them up and see if they got any material. See if you can borrow them, okay? Do whatever you can. Okay, come back here. NASW actually offers NASW in conjunction with the Clinical Society offers a review course. It's a day-long workshop on a Saturday. Obviously, it's not 4/30/2011, but it will be at the end of April. It's actually held in this building. And there's a group of us that teach that, and it kind of varies. I wouldn't even recommend that course to you all, because I think you know this stuff, except for a couple groups of people. If you are really highly anxious, okay, really highly anxious, sometimes having a course like this can help alleviate some of your anxiety, right? So the more anxious you are, the more likely you are to not do well on the test, because you're so, like, freaked out about it. So if it helps to be in a course like this, then consider doing it. The other group that has found it helpful is if English is not your primary language, your first language, sometimes language barriers, and sometimes the nuance of language is what trips people up on this test. And in fact, I oftentimes think that they write this test trying to trip people up with the language, as opposed to what's really going on, like how to be a good social worker. Okay. Again, that information's on the NASW website. And then the Pearson View website will actually give you information on the testing centers, what the Palm thing looks like, all that kind of good stuff. And I'll try and pull that up when we get to the end here. They have a new system here, and I'm not even sure how it works. Oh, well, we'll figure it out. And then some of the texts that are in here, yeah, question.
So would you say that that exam or the review session that you do, would that be just a quick, easy overview? Would you recommend that? Or specifically for those who don't speak English and
I'm saying it, people, I think that the information that you need to pass this exam, you already hold, okay? But if there are other factors that make it harder for you to take a test, then the review course may help, okay? All the information's up here, right? You've been well educated. The trick, of course, is getting what you know up here onto the correct answer on the paper, so, okay? Some of these books should look familiar. How many of you have some of these books? Some of these were based on text that you get, right? Okay. Again, these are just suggestions of books that might be helpful for review. Okay. I know that when I took the exam, I went back and reviewed books that I had from my classes. So, okay. Any questions about sort of preparing for getting there, day of the test, bless you, things like that? Yes?
I'm assuming that the test doesn't do this, but does it show you after you submit your answers if you got it correct or not?
You mean at the end?
No, like while you take
No, because you can always go back and change it until you hit that final button. Okay? Yeah. That's why you can go back and change, like if you're done in 2 hours and you're like, oh geez, I'm already done, do I want to go back and like relook at all of them? You can. You could change answers. And again, my suggestion is know about yourself and how you do when you make and how you take tests. The other thing that I want to warn you all about is that Pearson View contracts with lots of different people. They're a company that provides tests. So you're there, you've been working for an hour, somebody comes in, they sit in the cubicle next to you, the little booth thing, you know, and you're plugging away, and 30 minutes later they get up and leave. Don't freak out, okay? They may have just passed their barber's exam, okay? So again, it doesn't mean that everybody in that room with you is taking the social work exam. There's lots of other exams that are offered by that center. So, yes, Liz. There's a clock in the room. I think there's a timer on the screen too. I took it with the last company, and it was a touch screen. This is a mouse driven, the new one, the company now, so. If I can get to the website, we'll be able to figure that out. Okay, so let's try some. Okay. So, the first thing you want to do, as I suggested, is to read the question carefully, right? A social worker has learned that a father becomes quite angry when his 2-year-old son soils or wets his pants. The father's usual response to this behavior is to severely spank the child. The father's behavior most likely reflects, okay? So, you got the most in there? Yeah. I mean, if you need to borrow my voice when you're taking this exam, feel free, right? Most often they are. A need to explore his relationship with the child. A distorted perception of developmental milestones. A need for developing new ways to cope with stress. Displacement of his anger toward his wife. Okay. Okay, which do you want to throw out quickly? D, okay. And A. Sounds good. Now we're left with B and C. Right? Thoughts about which of these two you think is the right answer? B. Anybody want to vote for C? Why?
I just think it's because it's taking more of the side of the client. Well, I guess if the father's a client, I'd say C, because it's taking more of the side of the client versus kind of, I don't know why.
Because I was looking for some people to pick C, right? Okay. So the question is asking you to explain what? An understanding of the father's behavior, right? What does his behavior reflect? C doesn't reflect the cause of his behavior, does it? It reflects what he needs to do to deal with it more effectively. Therefore, B is the correct answer. Okay? But do you see how B and C, you could probably make a case for either one on some level, but B's the better answer. Okay? And it doesn't mean that C's a wrong answer, it just means it's not the correct answer. Well, and the reason I say that is because it could be partially right, but it could be completely right, but the other one's the better answer, right? So you're looking for the best answer to the options given you. So the major task of adolescence is to resolve the conflict between, who's it starting to sound like? Yeah. Trust versus mistrust. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Independence versus dependence. Initiative versus guilt. This is kind of one of those knowledge things, right? Did I hear a lot of C's? C? Anybody want to vote for a different one? B? Why B? Mm-hmm. Well, it is the language that's used. The question is, does that define adolescence? Okay. Actually, B would be a pre-adolescent, right? Latency age? Okay. So you're all right. Almost all of you right. Yeah. Okay. Independence versus dependence, right? Launching. But you beginning to get a feel of the flow for the questions? Okay. So effective, was that a no? Say it out loud.
I said I was being sarcastic.
That's okay, you can be sarcastic. I like sarcasm, can you tell? So you're going to share with us what you said, even if it was sarcastic?
I just said no.
Oh.
I let the rest.
You will get, oh, wait a minute, I forgot, you're going to Iowa. That's, Liz has to put up with this all the time for me, so. Effective parental discipline for a 6-year-old child includes all of the following actions, except, okay? So we're looking for the exception, right? So the wrong answer is the right choice, right? Stopping or interrupting unacceptable behavior. Would you do that? Yeah. So that's not the correct answer. Would you suggest appropriate alternatives to the behavior? Yeah. So again, and therefore not the right answer. Would you indicate your disapproval of the behavior if you're the parent? Yeah, right? So would you postpone a response until the child can understand the consequences of the behavior? No, right? Okay. So the one you wouldn't do is the right answer because it's looking for the exception. Okay. Aversive conditioning might be the therapy of choice in all but which of the following? So what's aversive conditioning? Everybody remember what aversive, you all learned about operant and, remember those whole things? Like behavioral theory stuff, Skinner, Pavlov, all that kind of, yeah, okay. Okay. Well, let's see if we can figure it out. So, sexual perversion, simple phobia, school phobia, addiction. So, let's go back to the original part of the question. Aversive conditioning is making something something you're not going to like happen if you engage in the behavior. Okay? So, for example, everybody familiar with anabuse? Anabuse? It's a drug that you take, and if you drink while you're in anabuse, you puke your guts out. Okay? That's aversive conditioning. And it's commonly used in some treatment programs. Right? So, addiction would be where you would use aversive conditioning, which makes it not the right answer. Okay? Do you see how the question's worded? It's the therapy of choice in all but which of the following? Okay? Sexual perversion. Would you use aversive conditioning there? You might. There are programs that do that. Okay? Simple phobia. Okay. You might use it there, but probably not. In school phobia, would you use it there? No. Because school phobia, is it really a phobia? Okay, maybe it's become a phobia for people in college, but we're talking about little kids most likely, right? Right? It's really an anxiety disorder, right? So you're not going to, of the two, the better answer for where you wouldn't use aversive conditioning would be C. Okay? Does that make sense? Who said no? And the more you can practice these and kind of get that wording piece down, slow yourself down, read the question thoroughly. As I said before, okay, that's the most important thing you can do to prepare for this, is training yourself to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. According to behavior theory, a structured plan designed to change a voluntary behavior is called, so what are we changing? And we're looking for a structured plan, right? Operant conditioning, biofeedback, Classical conditioning, reinforcement. Okay, so what would you throw out? Okay, biofeedback. Where would you throw out operant?
Well, isn't operate more not voluntary?
No, it's just the opposite.
So then I would say, I meant A was the one I would pick.
Okay, good. You're on to something here. Classical conditioning is the involuntary behaviors, okay? It's Pavlov and the dog, right? You ring a bell enough times when you make a dog salivate, you ring the bell and the dog salivates, right? That's classical conditioning. But this is a voluntary behavior, which is a form of operant conditioning, right? So you eventually got to the right answer, right?
Just making sure you were paying attention.
I am. So, okay. Recognizing that the families you work with are social systems, does this sound familiar? You would expect that all of the following are true, except, okay, we're looking for the exception, right? Okay. So which of these is not true? Change in one member will affect the other members? Is that true? So that's not the right answer. A change in the system as a whole will affect each member. That's true, so it's not the right answer. Change is constant. Is that true? Okay, so let's, it's sort of true, but we'll hold off on deciding it's not the right answer. Change requires consensus among all family members. So the one that's the exception is D, right? Okay, good. So you might say, make an argument for C, but when you see the other one, it's like, no, that's the better answer, right? Okay. Mr. P, a normally healthy 43-year-old, is entering the hospital for minor knee surgery. His major adaptive task while hospitalized is accepting his dependent role, cooperating with the hospital caregivers, managing his absence from work, accepting the diagnosis. Right, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And going through the therapies, and they might have, yeah. Although none of this stuff happens in a hospital anymore, right? People now get knee replacements and they're out the next morning. But now we're reading more into it. See how you start to kind of go down that path? C is another good example. How do we know this guy works? Maybe he's a stay-at-home dad, right? But we just assume because it's a 43-year-old healthy male, he must be working, right? He must be working for somebody. But you can't make those assumptions. So, yes, A is the correct answer.
We've got some talent over here.
Were you right?
Well, she gets it before the question comes out.
Every single one.
Okay, I have to reframe this whole thing about Iowa, don't I? Are you from Iowa, or are you just moving to Iowa?
I'm from Iowa.
Okay. Okay, anybody from Nebraska? I'll start picking on Nebraska now. An initial psychosocial assessment should include all of the following information except, okay, again, we're looking for the exception, right? So what are we doing? We're doing an initial assessment. And what should be part of that? Problem identification. Would that be part of it? Community resources available? Okay, so let's hold off on that one for a minute. Family dynamics and support systems, that would be part of it. Client's cultural heritage, would that be part of it? So the correct answer is, did somebody say something other than B just now? Okay, good. So what would be B? BB? What would be B? It'd be the plan, right? The intervention. Very good. Okay, you would be how concerned? Most concerned about suicide when the client says life is not worth living, the client misses an appointment, the client expresses anger, the client gives favorite possessions away. D? I heard a few A's out there. Am I hearing things, or did some people say A? Okay, for the people that, how many people pick A? Okay, the Iowa lady didn't pick A, so. Really, it's coming down to A or D, isn't it? Okay. So let's try and deconstruct this for a moment. If a person says life is not worth living, are they acting, are they making plans to act? If they've started giving away possessions, have they started to act? Yeah. So which one is then most concerning about them acting? D. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, this is one of those basic straight knowledge things. Alcohol is a highly desired substance? No. It's noon somewhere, right? A hallucinogen? A stimulant? A depressant? A hypnotic? C? It's one of those straight, just something you know. The best example of primary prevention in the area of domestic violence. So we're trying to prevent domestic violence, okay? This is a good one. Mandatory reporting, premarital counseling, restraining orders, conflict resolution classes in schools. So it's primary prevention. What is primary prevention? Trying to stop something from ever happening, right? Okay. So D. Anybody want to vote for a different one as well? See, a lot of people like B. Exactly. So which is the better answer then? Very good. You miss a whole chunk of the population if you wait until premarital counseling, right? You miss out on all the high school stuff. At least currently in this state, you miss out on same-sex couples, you know. Okay. Another primary prevention in healthy aging. This time we're changing the focus of the group. Okay, so immunization against pneumonia and influenza. Come on. Exercise classes for people with arthritis. Diabetes education and support groups. Early detection screening for nutritional anemia. No. We're not preventing healthy aging. An example of primary prevention in healthy aging is A. Why is A the correct answer?
Because diabetes can happen to young people, and what if everyone doesn't have arthritis or nutritional anemia?
Okay. Okay, those things, what you're saying are good things, but the other important thing is once you're doing exercise class, you already have arthritis. So you're not preventing arthritis, right? You're actually now trying to help support them to live more healthily. But they've already got the problem, okay? So A is the correct answer. And how many of you, and I put this in here for a reason, how many of you have had your flu shots? Who's going no way? How come?
It's so bad.
Okay.
Because it, okay, so then it gets against one type of like flu, but then your body will produce like super like, well, bam, we're gonna overpower that.
The current vaccine is effective against about 65-70% of the strains out there,
But that other
including the mostly fatal strains,
But why do we have fatal strains?
because we don't have herd immunity. And herd immunity happens when everybody gets and then it's not able to keep passing on. So you're bringing down the herd.
But I have not had flu in a very long time, and I have not gotten any.
Good for you, but you could help everybody else out. I get into this because we lost a graduate student about 3 years ago to the H1N1, 27 years old. So it gets me all like, it's become my new thing during flu season. So I would encourage people to consider getting it, and it's not too late. Okay, where did it go that way? Michelle was right. This thing just sort of has a life of its own. It moves without doing anything. Okay. A social worker is meeting with the parents of an infant recently diagnosed with mental retardation. In the initial conference, the social worker should first provide the parents with, so we're doing this when? First. Okay. Names and locations of appropriate community education resources. Factual information, excuse me, about the child's specific form of mental retardation. An opportunity to discuss their feelings and ask relevant questions. A referral to a support group for parents who are experiencing a similar situation. C? Everybody wants to vote for C? You're a smart group. Good. Okay. Ethnic culture refers to the culture of the community of people who have a common identity based on a common what? History? Religion? Nationality? Political interest? History? Okay. Okay, so we have mostly history and a couple of votes for nationality. Other thoughts? Anybody want to duke it out over which of those two is the right answer? Okay, this table's being awfully quiet over here. What are you thinking? You like talking, but you think nationality? Okay. All this buzzing going on. What are people talking about this, or are you off on to Friday afternoon plans? Okay. Debate out loud so I can hear you.
So at work, where I work,
Mm-hmm.
we choose ethnicity, like we have race and it has a bunch of different
Mm-hmm.
options. When we choose ethnicity, it's either Hispanic or non-Hispanic, or I think it's, like Asian, Pacific Island, something like that. Which I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Except this is about ethnicity, and you just said you have questions on ethnicity that aren't based on country of origin.
Well,
Ethnicity is something you share together with your group of origin or who you grew up with, something you share.
Mm-hmm.
Or where you went.
Right. And who defines national boundaries? Governments. And who defines most national boundaries? Other governments, right? So the correct answer is actually history. right? It's a shared history, usually a shared language, things like that, right? Okay. Now, there are some countries where the ethnic origin of the group in that country fits within the confines of the national border, but for the most part, it's much broader, or there may be multiple ethnic groups. Okay. Which of the following is most likely to be a violation of confidentiality? Okay. So most likely. Discussing the case in consultation. Bringing up a case problem in a staff meeting. If it is, I'm in trouble. Including a case illustration in a professional journal article. Showing a videotape of a therapy group to your students. D? Did I hear something else over here? Oh. D? Everybody votes for D. Why is D the correct answer?
Well, isn't it, you need their consent or their release
Mhm.
in order to show it in a class setting? If
Right.
you don't have that, then,
Right. We don't know if we have it or not.
yeah, so
Right.
you,
Which is the hardest to protect the identity of the people? D. Because you're showing their faces, right?
voice,
Yep. Right. That would be reading more into the question. Right. So basically, it's hard to hide the identity of people you're seeing, right? Okay. Social worker is working with a group of adults in a senior citizen center, right? We're doing a little group work here. One of the clients indicates that she, excuse me, she's either going to kill herself or her husband, okay? You would encourage her to choose her husband, not her. No. The threat appears to be reflect intent rather than being ideational, okay? So what does ideational mean? Just thinking about it, right? The worker would, what's the worker going to do at that table? Oh, what is that table going to do?
I'm married, so I said I might have that idea.
Are you intending to do this, or is it just an idea? Okay, then I don't have to report you. Would you maintain the confidentiality of the communication? Would you call the police? Maybe. Okay. Would you communicate with the client's husband?
If he was at risk.
Now, it's intentional, not just ideational. Would you speak to the center's consultant? Okay, which is the most important thing that you have to do here? Client's husband, right? Duty to warn. Tarasov. Remember the Tarasov case? You talk about Tarasov? It's not sufficient to call the police. You have to actually warn the intended victim. And in this case, the intended victim is the husband, right? Good. Okay. A social worker has been, have this little box that's sitting right in the middle of this question. Assisting a person in securing subsidized rental assistance. I think I need to get rid of one of the words in there. Okay. Securing subsidized rental assistance. The landlord who has rented to other individuals referred by the social worker asks if the individual has a recent history of substance abuse. In response to this question, the social worker should. Okay, so what should the social worker do? Answer the question directly as asked. Secure a release of information from the client. Avoid the question by redirecting the conversation. Tell the landlord the information is confidential. D? Yes. Everybody votes for D? So you're all right. Okay, so, and this'll, so you get ones like this, right, where you're going, oh, that's easy, right, I know this stuff. And then you get other ones that get a little more convoluted and you have to think a little harder. So, answer quickly the ones you know how to answer, after you've thoroughly read the question. Paying attention to first and most and least and. Okay, the choice of the social group intervention for bereaved persons is most influenced by the fact that group members, okay, most influenced. And how do you like things like social group intervention for bereaved persons? What is that? It's a grief support group, right? Why don't they just say that? Right. Okay, so why is it, what is it about that? The fact that they can meet other bereaved people? That they can form a homogeneous group? Will feel they will be listened to? Have a common experience conducive to mutual aid? It could be which or which? A or D. Okay. Which one sounds more like an intervention? D. Good. Right? Now, it's true that it's helpful that they can meet other bereaved people, but the most important reason for making that referral would be the idea of mutual aid, right? It's, remember what I said about the wording sometimes? It's almost like they're trying to trip you up? Yeah. Okay, but if you keep going down that path of being angry at this test, guess who's going to win? Yeah. In fact, what I will tell, the other thing I tell people is, you know, if you want to fight with the test, do that afterwards.
I'll be the one in
You
the
know,
session coming up in April.
after being done, you know, you write the ASWB and you say, what in the hell were you thinking when you wrote it? You know, I mean, fight later, pass first, okay? Okay, I think I have one more here, maybe two. An explicit agreement between the social worker and client concerning target problems, goals, and strategies of social work intervention, and the roles and tasks of the participants is known as a, who said that? Contract? Process? Task analysis? Treatment plan. And somebody already gave the right answer. Did you have the right answers over there? Triage is a marital arrangement. Had to put that one in there for fun. Benefit for the aged. A program based on cost effectiveness in terms of a return on investment to society. A medical term for triangulation. What is it?
It's for 3 people being above, right? Or more than
Well, that would make A.
Oh, I guess I'm just thinking of
Okay, so, but actually the correct answer, even if you're thinking a nursing triage, would still be the same one. Anybody else? Okay, so what is triage?
It's what you first do when you get to a hospital to check on the seriousness of everything.
Why?
To know what you need to do next.
No, you categorize what's the worst, the main thing was life threatening. Then you go with, you know, what could be prior.
What can we save? What isn't worth trying to save? Where do we get the most bang for our buck? C. Right. Okay. Does that make sense? You can use it in terms of a medical setting, you can use it in terms of an organization, right? So how cost effective, if I'm going to spend $1 million how am I going to do the most good with that $1 million? Right? If I had $2 million, I'd rename the Summit Classroom building to something more appropriate, but that's the going rate apparently of renaming that building.
Why not rebuild it?
We didn't build it.
I said we should rebuild it.
Yeah, we should. Like this, that used to be McNeely Hall. That's where the school business was. And then they got a bunch of money and built this building and called it McNeely because it's the business school. Anyway, we won't go there because I could go off on long tangents. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to get to these websites. Here we go. Okay, so just to give you an idea. Okay, so here's the ASWB website. And you see where it says social work licensing exams? Has all kinds of great information. In fact, if going to taking, things you have to bring to the appointment. This thing doesn't want to load. They used to have a real computer up here. I don't know what they did with it. Video tour of a test site. This is a good one. Okay, so this gives you can kind of go through a run through of what the room is set up like, including the biometrics. Okay, that's what the palm reader looks like, right? So go to their website and spend a little bit of time just so you get a sense of what things are like. So the more you know, the more less anxious you can be, right? Okay. If you're trying to figure out your state, and I'm not seeing it, but it's got to be in here somewhere. Somebody see the one that says list of member states? Oh, links to social work boards. So we were looking at not Missouri, Kansas, right? So there's not a board of social work. There's not a board of social work. But there's a behavioral science regulatory board, okay, like Wisconsin has. Right? So they do like social workers. It's not just social workers. They license other mental health and other professionals, human service professionals. No, it's just the way they're set up. So you can look at what does it take to get licensed, right? You can find out, okay, here we go, social workers, right? Baccalaureate social workers. So you have to go graduate from a CSWA accredited program, right? Which you all are about to. So you can, I mean, like.
So I don't have those 4,000 hours thing, or the continuing education at all in Kansas?
It doesn't matter where it's at. Wait a minute, when you say continuing ed, you don't start the continuing ed clock until after you get licensed.
Right.
Can you get licensed right out of school, or do you have to do all those requirements in the process of getting licensed?
Right, but when she was talking about getting licensed and then you have to be supervised for those 4,000 hours, I don't think, according to that, I don't have to do that.
That may very well be. In fact, most states didn't even license bachelor's level social workers until more recently.
So is that a disadvantage for me? Like, am I gonna have a harder time or something?
No. What it may mean is that, so say you go off to Kansas, you work for a couple of years, right? When you if you move back to Minnesota, no.
Never moving back.
Do we want her back? Is that? I'm kidding. Yeah. Okay. What you might want to think about is you may have to meet some of those requirements if they weren't part of your original licensure, right? Like in the grandparenting period, if you didn't have to take the test and then you move to a state that requires the test, you might have to do that. Okay. Okay, the other place I wanted to go real quick. We're going to skip Iowa. Sorry, Liz.
What about Wisconsin? Colorado.
I just want you to see what Minnesota's looks like, okay? And do you see how there's this stuff up there? Make sure you slide all the way over because it's a really wide page, and a lot of times people miss stuff in the right-hand column. Okay? So it has all this great information, but the one that that's really helpful to get to and now where'd it go? Oh, here we go. Students. A Student's Guide to Licensing in Minnesota. Okay. This is a really helpful handbook. Find it on their website because it goes through all the stuff that Cheryl was talking about. See ya. Ooh. Okay. Any questions? Does it feel a little overwhelming? It should feel a little overwhelming at this point. Okay? I mean, think about it. The rest of your professional life lies in the fact that you're going to, okay, I'm kidding. But there is an underground, I mean, there's an undercurrent of that whole notion or feeling, right? That's part of what makes it so anxiety provoking.
I've found with myself, that's why it doesn't feel.
Okay. You started drinking already? No. Again, what I said before, you have the knowledge to pass this exam. It's in there. I know it's in there. And if you ever have any doubts, talk to the Iowa people.
Got all the answers.
Exactly. That's, yeah, question.
I guess a quick question would be for those of us who pass the study for this test or fail, what they need to brush up on, what things would you, how would you just like study without going crazy? What kind of things would you focus in on, theory through here?
Well, go back to that outline. Look at the outline and use that to help guide some of where you spend your time and energy. Like there's some questions on basic research stuff, and people used to freak out about that because nobody likes research. I shouldn't say that out loud because some of my colleagues will get mad at me. But the reality is there was like 1 or 2 questions. So why put all your time and energy into an area that it doesn't matter? Put it in the areas where it's most likely to have question content areas. Okay. And again, what I would do is, for an hour or 2, once a day, if you have that kind of time, review your materials for the last 2 years. If you have time. If that will help you, okay? Maybe for a couple of weeks leading up to the test, but not the night before the test. Okay? No, I didn't say to go out. After you pass, you can do that. Yeah. Now, the night before, you just want one to help you relax. Yeah. But my instructor told me I should get, yeah. Okay. I'm realizing I went over a few minutes here, so I want to be respectful of time. If you have any more questions, come and ask me. Otherwise, have a good rest of the weekend. You're welcome. Yeah.
The study guide, the book itself, do you have to order it online or can we just get it from like Barnes and Noble or something?
I don't think they have it at Barnes & Noble. I would highly doubt it. You can, I'll show it to you right here. Where'd it go? Study guides. So there's a $30 guide that's a paper guide that they'll send you. Okay. Or there's an online question guide that is,
I thought they said 70 earlier.
where did I see that?
Online, right here, click here, right there.
Oh, maybe it is only 30. Okay.
I thought you said there was one for 70.
Well, I think that it might be the clinical.
Yeah, she said it was only good for a month though, the $70 one.
That was the online one. But this is, okay. So go on their website, click around, kind of get good information, get
Okay.
kind of comfortable with what is out there. And again, you know, if you can get a guide, some of these might actually be in the library.
Okay.
I know they used to be, and you know, if they're old, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get the exact questions from the test anyway, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of practice kind of the language and the rhythm of the test.
There's a ton of free practice tests online. Yeah, I've been taking several of them. If you just Google social work
test.
licensure practice test, they all show up. And they're timed.
sorry.
So I mean, they're shorter than the other ones, so you can take it a few times, but it's all like the same.
How do you get your supervision and try to do that?
And then they tell you. how
Travel
you
to
did.
play or travel for work?
At the end, it tells you if it's right or wrong and why you're wrong. So, yeah, they're
I'm
really
too
good.
young to try to stay.
I'm trying to think of how, part of it will depend on if, you know, like if you're traveling internationally,
Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where, I'm trying to think about that. And see if I should maybe stay put for a while and get my get my licensure, get licensed, and then think of getting a job and going.
but you could potentially do a lot of the supervision stuff either through Skype or on the phone. You can't get 100% of it that way, but you can get a good chunk of it that way. And when you're back, you find somebody to supervise you kind of face to face, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Seriously think about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
My kids all live in New York. My parents are going to South Dakota, so I don't know if I'm going those option ways, you know?
Right.
You know, 'cause, yeah, at my age, parents are starting to get where maybe I need to go there.
Oh, yes, and I
You know?
understand that one.
So, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Kids, that way maybe grandbabies someday, but yeah, I don't know. They can live on their own. I can come with grandbabies.
And New York City or New York State?
Upstate New York.
Okay.
All over. One went out that way and they all followed.
Mm-hmm. I thought maybe they all started out that way and
No,
you
they-
got out.
No, they all, one went out that way and they all followed.
Yeah, good. Question?
Kind of have a hypothetical mandated report question, because I don't, hypothetically wouldn't know what to do if this would happen.
Okay.
Say somebody, like my cousin, is in prison for all this sorts of stuff, and he calls me and tells me that he is going to kill someone. When he gets out in a few weeks, or they tell him he can't come in, he's gonna call someone to kill this person. Do I have, I mean, he has, I mean, it's not something that he's like, oh, I might do this, or I'm like, whatever, he's just talking. He has done stuff like this before. And the call was recorded.
Here's the technical answer.
Okay.
The technical answer is technically no,
Okay.
until you're licensed
Okay.
or degreed. Okay?
Not licensed yet.
Or have your degree yet.
Okay.
On the flip side, when you live with yourself, if he follows through on this, I mean, that's the thing I always come back to. I would rather be sued for violating confidentiality than be responsible for somebody losing their life.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, obviously, this guy also has a baby about to be brought into the world. I don't want this baby growing up with the dad died. But then puts me in the hard position because I'm the only one that knew, and then he could, I don't know.
And you know that the call was recorded?
He's in prison, so all the calls in prison are recorded.
Not always, but
Well, it says this call is recorded
does it?
for when you do want to accept the charges with it. I mean, I can't tell the individual. Who do
Who would you tell?
Yeah.
I
mean,
wouldn't.
Do I tell his parole officer confidentiality, or?
You could tell the parole officer. Is he currently in prison?
He's in prison, yeah.
So his parole
He's
officer may
waiting
not
for
even
his
have.
parole to get out. He's
You
finding
can
out
probably
he's
also
60
call the prison warden.
And just say
Say,
you might want to.
there was this conversation that happened that really was concerning to me, and here's the date and time of the conversation, you might want to listen to it. And I think it's credible, if you think that.
Right. I mean, he's tried to kill 3 people already. And so, I mean, it's not like a threat.
Oh, it is a threat.
I mean, it's not like an empty threat.
Right.
It's not like whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Good, yeah.
it, but when I get back, I can still work on it and finish it. So
Okay.
if you just have anything to add to it
Okay.
in the interim, because I don't know if we're gonna do much on it anyways before our next beta meeting.
Okay.
But because we're using the bus tour stuff, if you wanted to get that in.